Hi everybody, welcome to the Painter portion of our class tutorials. This is what you're going to see at first when you load Painter. You're going to see the Painter's 12 splash screen, and that's what this is called. This picture is just an image of things people have painted in Painter. If you hit the button, you'll get a refresh and you'll see other sample pieces of artwork, which is probably one of my favorite parts of Painter. You get an idea of some of the things that you can do in Painter. If you click this button, it won't show in Startup anymore, but it is useful as well as being interesting. Here you can create a new image, open an existing image, or click on recent documents. And this is where I can grab a bunch of recent documents that I've had, or I can load a template that might already exist. I can also choose a workspace if I have one saved, and I can load straight into brush stacking or color management. So there are a lot of default things that you might run into, like create a new image or a recent document, that it might be worth keeping this open for. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new image. Now, I don't care much about what's in this particular box for this project because I'm just going to be showing you guys stuff. I do want to show you that there are some presets for canvases and that this defaults to pixels. So I'm going to change it to inches and make myself 8.5 by 11 size sheet of paper, just a regular sheet of paper. And then we're going to talk a little bit, if you want to name it, DR270. Whoops. Now I hit enter before I really got very far. So I went back to File, New Image, and brought it back up. So one of the things you want to pay attention to is also the resolution, or pixels per inch. One of the things you want to keep in mind is that you want it to be a nice enough image for you to see in whatever platform you're going to see it in. So in order to keep file sizes small, you should know that anything that you view on a computer monitor is only going to be really good up to 72 dpi. Anything above that is wasted. Your screen can only project 72 pixels per inch. It depends on how big it is, but if you zoom into it, it'll get more pixelated, but at the size that you make it, it can only support 72 dpi. Now, printing, however, can get much finer in detail and therefore get us better quality. And when we look at that, for your general printing on your home printer, 200 resolution is probably going to be fine. But if you're printing for high quality print press, if you're going to send this to a printer, then you'd want it at 300 dpi. Just going to make that. So yeah, I just made two things, but I'm not worried about it. I don't really need both of them. So let's introduce you just a little bit to Painter itself. We have a menu bar up here, and this should be, if you notice, this is not the default layout. I've got some things moving over here. So if I want to get it back to what it's supposed to look like, and so that our things look the same, you should go to Window, Arrange Palettes, Default. And there we go. This is the original navigator, color, layers, everything open. That should be open is open. All your tools are in the right places. So your current brush, or the thing in your hand right now, is over here. This is our contextual menu for our brushes, and these are our recent brushes. As you can see, I've been playing with some watercolor over here. So the last 8 brushes that I did were watercolor brushes. This over here is our main toolbar, and you can see that there are kind of different sets of tools in here. You have the grabber, or the hand, which is a great shortcut with the spacebar, as it is in most programs, like Adobe and things like that, and Acrobat. You have dropper for grabbing color. Excuse me. You have a paint bucket for filling color, an eraser for erasing things, a layer adjuster, which will allow you to move all of the content on one layer, and you can see this little black arrow right here. What that black arrow does is if you click and hold, that means there are more options under that area selector. And in this case, that is the transform tool. As you can see, my whole canvas just changed a little bit. I've got some handles in the corner, and I could now, if I wanted to, start scrunching and moving things. I'm going to say no to that transformation because it's really not necessary. I'm going to click and hold again and change it back to my normal tool. You have a rectangular selection tool. If you click and hold, you can also have an ovular one. It also happens to be pretty easy to click on the rectangular selection tool and choose a new selection tool from up here on the contextual menu. I could choose both an oval selection tool, which are under this tool, or I can choose either of the two selection tools that are actually under a different tool. Giving us this duplicate selectability helps us to navigate our tools better, and there are lots of different ways to do things, not only more than one way to access a tool, but more than one way to use a tool as well. We have a magic wand tool, which allows us to make large selections, and it tries to give us an idea of that. A selection adjuster, which generally allows you to move selection lines that you've already made. A cropper, which will allow you to permanently cut out extra pieces of your image. A pen tool in order to create vector artwork. A rectangle tool, which can also allow you to do rectangle circles and freelance and access the pen tool, which is the same vector artwork just as shapes. Text, which is always vector artwork. And another selection tool. And this one is called, if I hover over it, leave my thing so, the shape selection tool. And this little group of lines all relate to one another. So what that means is the shape selection tool will allow you to select path work when you're working with it. You have a cloner, which is connected to the painter's ability to duplicate pictures. And you have this, which is the dodge tool. If you hold down, you'll also get the burn tool. And that allows you to do some photo editing where you kind of lighten and darken certain areas. The mirror painting tool, which is super fun, and we will work with that in a little bit. And then the divine proportion tool allows you to add other lines like the mirror painting tool. It also hides the perspective tool and the grid tool. We'll cover those a little bit more later. Allow you to see and not see it. I needed to go back to the mirror painting tool and click the off button in order to get rid of that center line. You have the hand tool, which allows you to click and move things. It's also very useful to use the space bar to do that as well. The zoom tool, and this is a rotator tool. Now I want to warn you that this rotation symbol is the same one as this one over here, and it does not do what you think it does. This does not rotate your paper. Now I know what you're thinking. It looks like it rotates your paper. It sure does look like it rotates your paper, but it doesn't rotate your image. If you look over here, you can see that if I zoom in and you can see the navigator box, when I turn it, all I'm doing is turning the red box. I'm not actually turning the piece of paper. So what that means, and to get reset rotation, I can click this button right here and reset it right back to normal. Also, I can zoom in and out by scrolling the wheel in and out, which is nifty. So the navigator allows you, this particular tool allows you to spin, and you can see in the navigator that I'm not changing the orientation of the page. Now if I went to canvas and rotate canvas 90 degrees, now my page is rotated. You can see that my physical page is rotated. Not only is my view rotated, but my page is also rotated. And if I move this to be perfectly up and down, this does not make my canvas vertical again. I have to rotate it again through the canvas layer. Again, you can reset that by clicking on this button here. Before we move on, navigation is a little bit easier up in this panel. You get, not only do you get a clear view of, I'm going to make this a little bigger, just in case you can't see it. Not only does this give you a clear view of where you are on the canvas if you're zoomed in, this little box right here gives you an idea what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and open a example. So in this image right here, I can get a clear idea of where I am by this navigation menu. I can tell which bear exactly I'm looking at, even if I'm all zoomed in. I can also tell what I'm doing and how it's affecting the overall look of the thing I'm painting. So if I'm painting something over here, I can tell that this little teddy bear getting painted is how that's going to affect the overall image as it updates. So you see right there, I get an idea of, okay, this is a red teddy bear. I can zoom in and zoom out over here. I can also change the percentage on this slider, and you can see that it's trying to update in both places as best it can. I can, there's some more watercolor there. I can see width, height, and resolution as it stands in any particular place and at the zoom range I'm at, so I can tell if the noise I'm seeing is because of a low DPI or because of the brush I'm using. Our color is the next thing I want to talk about, because you have two color swatches here and you have a multitude of color opportunities here. This is the color mixer, and the color mixer has a really useful way of picking color here that's a little more complex than your normal hue and saturation color picker. But essentially, this is the ring around it is the hue ring, and you pick which hue you would like. If you like green or blue or purple or red, and then on the inside you're choosing your saturation. So you choose if you want a really saturated red color or a pink. You can see the color changing right here. Or if you want it to get really white, all the way in that corner is white, or if you want it to get really dark near black, and then all the way in that corner is black. So this lets you pick some things, but what if you want to keep some colors? To sample them again, you can use different color sets. In the flyout menu, you can pick a new color set and you can label it whatever your project is so that you can access it later. For example, Kiss Me Kate is a color set here that I used, and I named all of these colors. Well, a bunch of these colors I named. And now I know that if I need to paint something in Kiss Me Kate that's red, I know I'm always going to come back to this one red color, so that I'm sure that all of my colors are close together. If I'm going to paint blue, I'm going to paint all of them this blue, so that I don't need to worry about getting the wrong colors, right? I'm going to have a more restricted color palette. Also, if you want to have things a little bit more consistent, you can go to your color set libraries and turn on or off other colors. So this color set I pulled from an image, and I don't always need it on. So if I go to the flyout menu, go to color set libraries, I can turn on and off any of the ones I want. Painter colors is a wide range of bright colors often used in painter sets. The types of things that you would buy if you went to the store and you said, hey, I want a set of paintbrushes. This is a very similar, a very accurate set of paint colors that you would get if you tried to do that, right? So you can change your colors here in color set libraries. You can import colors from a picture, you can create a new color set, and if you decide to make a color, and let's say you pick a random color, and I pick that one because it's very different. I'm going to turn off the painter color set. So all I have is the Kiss Me Kate color set, and I'm going to get close to it, and then I'm going to hit this add color to color set button. Didn't work. No. I want to add a color. Weird. Usually you should be able to pick a color and then add it. Oh, I guess I didn't, for some reason I didn't have the color selected, so you need to select a color inside the correct color set so that it knows you want to add something to that color set, and then click add color and they'll pop up right down here. It'll usually number them by default and you can rename them later simply by right clicking on them. And saying rename is a pretty easy way to do that. Another way of mixing or making colors is mixing colors. And your default color palette looks something, restore default mixer, looks something like that. I do like to make this nice and big. I'm not gonna lie. I find it extremely fun just to play inside the mixer. Now this is your default mixer palette. You can zoom in and out in this mixer palette. You can change your brush size to big or small here. That's the little brush size symbol there. And you can paint with a bunch of colors. You can choose anything up here. You can click and paint. Click and paint. And then what you can do is you can, while you're clicking and painting, you can let your brush run into other colors and see what happens. And generally what happens is you get some sort of mix between those two colors, and you keep painting, you eventually push back out to the original color that you had. But if you just want to mix two colors that already exist, you can grab this second brush here and mix colors. So you can make yourself some space. I want this to be even more light colored, and you can start blending and mixing colors to your heart's content. When you want to pick up a color in order to paint with it, as you can see I still have that original color I had in my hand, you use the eyedropper tool, the sample colors. Now you can see over here that my orange picked up, or I can take this green. You can also, a good thing to do is to click and hold and move around just a little bit to see the variation in color that you have in this grouping. Because especially right down here, I have some very deep green oranges, kind of grayish colors, some kind of medium colors, some light colors, some really light colors. So I'm not sure which one I want to grab. Another really advantageous part of Painter is that you can actually sample multiple colors. And so if you get right on the edge of two colors and sample multiple colors, what will happen is that a couple of brushes are designed to hold multiple colors at one time. The one I'm using right now happens to be one of them. And you can see that I'm getting both brown and green on both sides of my brush. When I throw my feature down like that, you can really see all of them being very, very evenly loaded on both sides of my brush. But as I make it more, turn my feature up, I'm going to give it a very furry look to this bear maybe. But you don't see those two color differentials as much, but I get a much more interesting brush stroke much quicker than if I tried to add these two things separately. Right? I can also then blend these two colors together at any time. So the mixer is a very cool thing. You can also zoom in or out. I said out. Oh, by control clicking on in the panel. And again, you can use the hand tool to move around. And when you're moving with the hand tool, you can then pick a bunch of colors and set it down and see what happens when you mix some pretty colors together. Now it's important to remember that whatever's in the mixer palette is not really savable. So it's very fun. I love just mixing in the mixer palette, but it's not really a piece of art that I can save. So if I decide that I really love it, I can't save it. So you can still do most of this kind of blending in your actual file if you just want to play and sculpt and start making something that you might want to keep. So be careful that you're not always making tiny little bits of art that you want to keep and then can't. Dirty brush mode allows the brush that you're using to either get contaminated when it swashes through colors or not. Do you see how when I turn it on and off, what happens is more or less my brush will get a really dirty other color on it just when I run through that color. So what'll happen is that instead of blending and continuing to blend the color that's on my brush, I am going until it runs out. I'll end up running through paint and then continuing to drag that old color around. If that makes any sense at all. If you're a painter, it's where you kind of contaminate your brush with another color. So even if I try and paint yellow, I get this weird mix of yellow and blue since I'm so close to blue. Even though yellow is really still the color on my brush. So the mixer palette is very awesome and very cool and very powerful. And it should go right back into our color palette. And so it's very useful to use all three of these methods to make colors. Sometimes I grab a mixer color and then fine tune it a little bit with the color tool and then save it in the color set library. Some people are more color picker people or color mixer people, and you could be both or any one or any combination, and that's fine. You don't have to get your colors from the mixer palette, and you don't have to get them from the color wheel, but either way, you can get them. You also have the layers panel, which has a multitude of different layers, now different aspects to it. Now, traditionally, layers are a pretty common thing we see in computer programs now, and we talked about them a little bit in SketchUp. But what they do for us here is they give us the advantage of having different pieces of paper lying over each other. You can see in this background right here that this back area and this front area aren't touching. And if I take my resaturation down to 0 and make my current brush a blender and do it on the layer with that greenish brownish lovely mix of colors, and I start mixing them together, I can blend them. But you notice how I'm not blending the outlines of the teddy bear? That's because they're on a different layer. They're actually on this layer right here, which means I can turn them off and make them invisible. I can choose to be able to sample from them or not, and I can choose to be able to just not see them. I can also change their order, so I can take that layer and put it behind another layer. For instance, this layer with all that blue, if I put it behind there, you can't see it because it's not transparent. I can also make it transparent. So this is the composite method, which means it's how these two pieces of paper work together. Right now, you can see all this checkerboard right here. That's where it's transparent. And anywhere that it's transparent, you can see through the material and into the layer below it. But anywhere it's not transparent, you can't see through it because the layer mode is normal. But you can tell the computer to treat it differently. One of the most easy to see is gel. Instead of pretending this layer is made out of solid material or normal material, I'd like you to pretend it's made out of gel. And once I do that, you can see through it. But it changes, notice how it changes the way that teddy bear's line work looks. It's very gray here, and it has lots of different shades to it. When I turn it back on, it stays grayish and has shade to it, but it changes color and it changes quality. So it makes an interesting combination method. I would recommend playing with a bunch of these and seeing what they do. For instance, some of them are like color, where they give you a very different impression when you choose that layer, combination. Another thing you can do, let's say you want to keep it normal, is you can take your opacity of the entire layer and turn it down. And this does change the kind of color that occurs, so keep that in mind. You also have, this is your opacity symbol to show your control of this. You also have pick up underlying color, which means if I'm trying to blend, I will pick up a color from another layer. So let's pick up underlying color. So even though these colors aren't on the same layer, I can still pick them up and play with them, supposedly. The reason I can't is because that other layer was on. So these items are on a completely different layer, right? They're way down here on the canvas layer. But if I have this on, which is pick up underlying colors, I can actually pick up and blend with another layer. Now, while I'm painting right now, I'm actually painting on the impasto layer, this layer up here, which means that if I were to check and see which layer I'm on and turn this off, all that blending actually happened on the impasto layer. I didn't touch or alter the canvas layer at all. That's good to keep in mind. So that's an introduction to your layers panel. There's lots of other things we can do with it, including masks, layer organization. If you need a new layer, you want to click this button. And it's highly advisable that you keep everything on different layers for every different step that you go through. You can also trash layers anytime you need to get rid of them. Bloop. Now, if you ever do use watercolor, you need to make sure it will create its own layer in the layers panel. That was that one we just deleted, watercolor layer 1. It'll create its own watercolor layer for you because watercolors need their own layers to operate. So they'll operate on their own layers, doing their own thing, having a good time. And you don't have to worry about making them new layers, but you do have to worry about trying to paint oil pastels or oil or acrylic or any other medium on the watercolor surface. It won't work. Last but certainly not least, we have these little pictures under here. And this is paper textures. So if you have a brush that is responsive to paper textures, which not all are, you're pretty much assured that chalks and those types of things will respond to your paper texture accordingly. There, you can see those dots. That's this paper texture right here. If I change the paper texture to this other texture, it's very close, but it is different. You can see that it's more of a diagonal look. It's actually the same texture, I think, just on an angle. And then you could also have like this artist rough paper. So this is the same brush that I'm using, or pointed crayon actually. The same chalk that I'm using with the same pressure. I'm actually using my mouse right now so that you can see that it's all the same pressure. I'm going to select all, whoops. I'm going to hit Control A to select all and Control X to clear everything off my canvas. Oops, did not work. Maybe I did that. My computer is being a little silly right now, but that's okay. Just going to grab the bucket tool, fill it with white so we have a plain background here, and grab my thing again. I'm actually using the mouse so that all of the pressure is exactly the same. So that is one texture and another texture and another texture. So these are all paper textures, and you, with any medium that responds to the paper texture, you can bring that out depending on what you want. There are also many different kinds of brushes that aren't brushes. Well, they are brushes. They're in the brushes panel and they do things and they paint things, but we actually don't have them as brushes necessarily. They do other things. There are ones that are blenders, which don't really put down paint, they just move paint around. And you have ones that paint with images instead of paint or color, and you have ones that paint with patterns. You would decide those images and patterns down here. We may cover those quite a bit later, but so this little panel right here is not very useful to you at this point in time, but it does exist and it is useful for Painter overall. So that's our introduction to Painter and Painter Space, all of those things. We are going to cover brushes, brush variants, and the brush context menu in our next video. Thank you.